think I've never talked about such a forbidden Gnostic text as this one because, yes, my people, today in this live stream, I'm going to tell you about the analysis that an artificial intelligence did of the forbidden Gospel of Judas. So, you know, right? We already know that today I am totally Carol Capel, your favorite excommunicated one. Oh, today I'm really something. Today I'm the terror of all the Aunt Nades in the comments. Because amid the scorching and dirty deserts, all filthy in Egypt, there rested a very silent manuscript wrapped in dust and mysteries. Manuscript. This one was waiting for the day the world would be ready for what it has to reveal. Or at least for the world to be curious enough to find out what's in these texts. Or maybe for the world to be ready to face a truth very different from the one we've been taught for centuries. I'm talking about that scrap of paper there, which is the Gospel of Judas. And no, this is not just another apocryphal text left behind by history. It is, in fact, a threat to the dominant narrative of Christianity. So it's no wonder I started this live by saying that the Aunt Nadies out there are going to ban me from their lives today. And it is such an intense threat that for almost 2 millennia, this threat was suppressed, hidden, discredited, and labeled as heresy. But after all, what is in this gospel that led the church to ban it for so long? What is so dangerous about it that it doesn't even deserve mention in Sunday sermons? Well, what's going on, everyone? I've already told you that an artificial intelligence is being used to retranslate and also to analyze specific things about the Gospels. So it has already analyzed the entire Bible, and I have a video here where I explain in detail what this analysis is and what the artificial intelligence said about the Bible, but in a very specific way. They're also using these apocryphal texts, like the Gospel of Judas itself, and putting them into this same artificial intelligence to see if it can find patterns. Because, guys, artificial intelligence is totally impartial, it's completely robotic, and it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have beliefs. So, when doing these analyses, the analysis comes out much purer than, obviously, if a human were to analyze it. So, to start off by talking about these mysteries, I'm going to begin by talking about the role reversal that happens there. In the Gospel of Judas, you must know this figure, Judas Iscariot. This name has crossed the centuries as a synonym for betrayal. And he is not only portrayed as a villain, but also as the villain who was very close to Jesus. So I think it gets even worse. He was his best apostle. After being the best apostle, he betrayed Jesus. But according to the translations and the interpretation of this IA from the Gospel of Judas, the story is a little bit different. The story in the Gospel of Judas says that he was the closest and most enlightened disciple of Jesus. And that in itself already breaks with the backbone of the Christian doctrine tradition. Because after all, in the Gospel of Judas, he didn't betray Jesus out of greed or spiritual weakness, but he would have done it out of obedience because Jesus had asked him to do it. So, in this new context, translating what Judas said in his own gospel, the traitor becomes the only one capable of understanding the true essence and true mission of his master. Guys, notice how the narrative shifts. It's interesting. Maybe that's the reason why the church banned this gospel, but we're going to go much deeper. There are many layers here. Because according to the text, Jesus reveals that Judas was a bearer of cosmic secrets. But what cosmic secrets? Secrets that Jesus himself told him. So he only told Judas and didn't share this information with any other disciple. And the betrayal, therefore, the supposed betrayal, would have been a conscious act of sacrifice, an act that was necessary to free the divine spirit that was trapped there in the physical body. So the shock of this statement, guys, it really can't be underestimated, right? Because if Judas didn't betray but actually obeyed a request from Jesus, the whole logic of martyrdom changes, right? The sacrifice on the cross shifts from being a result of human sin to a deeper, more complex divine plan. Oh, excuse me? And there is also that, right? A plan that involves hidden knowledge about layers of reality, a completely dual nature of the being Jesus. In other words, things are getting wild, I know, I warned you, but bringing it here, right, to real life. Notice, everyone, it's as if Jesus knew exactly what would happen to him. So he asked Judas to help him do something, which in our interpretation was considered as no, because it wasn't me or you who interpreted it. But even in the narrative the church wanted to build, that's their interpretation. It was a betrayal then, the Gospel of Judas, guys. It suggests that salvation doesn't come through blind faith, but through gnosis, that is, through secret and personal knowledge of the truth. In fact, Gnosis is the name given to the movement that spread separate from the church. The Gnostics, who were those guys I already told you about, were considered the true followers of Jesus Christ. And these statements that I'm telling you here, this artificial intelligence analysis of the Gospel of Judas challenges the church's entire dogmatic structure, which from the very beginning, since its institutionalization is based there, focused on submission, faith, obedience to the sacred word, and avoiding deep questioning of these texts. Then you can't question, you just have to follow and follow and follow and believe and bow your head. But the content of the Gospel of Judas, it doesn't bow its head to those people, okay, guys? It's absolutely explosive, and it's like this, look, in fragments, okay? So artificial intelligence is having to reconstruct these fragments, right? Using languages that are already lost, right? And it has to redo these texts. And in these fragments that survived, which date back to the 3rd century, they go back to a much older oral tradition, okay? He talks about Jesus laughing at the apostles when they perform religious rituals and say prayers. Have you ever imagined that, guys? He goes completely against everything we think exists. Why? Because according to this gospel, Jesus considers people who pray, people who perform religious rituals as being ignorant beings. Beings trapped by the illusions of the material world and deceived by a lesser God who is the demiurge. So the Gospel of Judas dives deep into the waters of Gnosticism. That's the doctrine I explained before, claiming the world's creator isn't the supreme God, but a lesser being, which is the demiurge, who has his overseers, the archons, who are responsible for imprisoning the divine spirit in matter. So the role of Jesus is not, in this context, that of the founder of an institutional religion. Instead, he comes with the purpose of freeing the divine spark within his followers and guiding them out of illusion, that is, guiding them out of the matrix. And that explains the reason for the exclusion of this gospel, right, guys? It's kind of obvious, isn't it? Because the gospel proposes a cosmology where the God of the Old Testament is just an imperfect architect. And this architect ignores the existence of higher planes. So Jesus in this context would be an emissary from a kingdom above all of this, who came to break the prison of flesh and time. And Judas, by betraying Jesus, frees himself and also frees Jesus from the prison of the body, allowing his spirit to return to its place of origin. So these words that I am saying to you are a reading completely incompatible with the official Christian interpretation, which preaches atoning sacrifice for the remission of sins, which also requires the mediation of the church for the salvation of the soul. And here in this gospel, Judas is saying no, that we are divine beings, that Jesus came here to show us this. As if that weren't enough, there's something even more disturbing in this gospel, because fragments of the text reveal that there are codes inserted in the words, like hidden messages only for those who have eyes to see. So there are passages that talk about parallel kingdoms, parallel realities, multiple celestial entities, dimensional barriers, and the manipulation of reality by spiritual beings. So Jesus, within this gospel, he's not just an earthly Messiah, he's kind of like an interdimensional being, you know? He is aware that the visible world is an orchestrated illusion, and the crucifixion itself, according to some scholars of this gospel, and that's how they came to this conclusion. It would be a kind of necessary enactment to break the seals of this cosmic prison. And Judas, in this scenario, he becomes an agent of awakening, a destroyer of paradigms. So this discourse couldn't survive in a world controlled by institutionalized religions which depend on the hierarchy of fear to maintain their influence within this world. The figure of Judas as a traitor needed to be kept there as operational, functional, because Judas in this context is a symbol of error, temptation, and disobedience. He serves as a warning for people, for the faithful, not to stray from this established path. But then the opposite, right? A cool Judas, a Judas just like us, a top Judas, an enlightened Judas, right? A Judas who acts in the name of a higher truth. Within the context of the official narrative, that would be unsustainable, right? It would be as if we admitted that the dogmas are fragile and that the official faith is based on an edited version of reality. And also these texts, all the ones I told you about, they're from the 3rd century, but they connect, they join with those texts found in 1970 in the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt. And these other texts, they were written in Coptic, which is another language. And they are not the only version, because there are other versions. There are several versions of the same Gospels available in private libraries, in monasteries, inaccessible in the Vatican's vaults. So folks, what we have access to is just a part, a fragment of the truth. There are passages that have never been translated and never will be. And these passages contain information about cycles of the soul, about genetic manipulation, about human bodies that are possessed by entities from the ethereal plane, about the traps of reincarnation, and even about secrets of time. Hi, how are you? It's like, how come? Are you still alive after everything I said, or have you already given up on the video? Aunts? Nate? I'm sure they left the video, right? Yes, I left. I went to knit and crochet because everything you say is just nonsense, silly stuff. But according to these theories and the artificial intelligence's own analysis, the true content of the Gospel of Judas goes way beyond theology, okay? It's a manual for liberation, a guide for escape. For those who have realized that the world is a poorly built simulation, the clues to this poorly built simulation are there in the details. Because the text uses symbols that refer to sacred geometry, ancient astrology, and numerical codes that only make sense when cross-referenced with other Gnostic texts. In fact, there's a series here on the channel talking about the Nag Hammadi library. The 13 codices. The codices of Judas are one of the codices of the Nag Hammadi library. But in this entire library, which consists of the 13 codices, the names of the entities appear disguised. They are repeated there in cyclical patterns and fragments that refer to the third firmament and the throne of shadows, and the line that separates the worlds is written in a ritual language. So it is hidden beneath the textual surface as if the gospel were at the same time a book and a mirror. It reflects what the reader is prepared to read. So we're talking about better technology, right? Because nowadays we don't have this kind of technology in our writing. Nowadays, what's written is what's written, and we just use what's written. But in the case of the forbidden Gospels, the apocryphal texts, and the Gnostic texts from the Nag Hammadi library, we have a text that changes according to what the reader is prepared to see. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real reason why these texts were suppressed. And the Gospel of Judas itself, right? Not because it was false, but because it was dangerous, right? because it offered a version of Christianity that does away with the church, that does away with dogmas, temples, saints, and penances. He clearly states that salvation is individual and doesn't require anyone else. That each soul has its own journey, that knowledge is the path and not fear, right? He brings us things like that. Messages that are spread around, right? Through word of mouth, spread there in the early critical era. But later, right, it all became what we know today with the structures we're familiar with. So this information, the information I'm sharing with you here today about the Gospel of Judas, it would have blown up the foundation of religious power. We wouldn't have any of what we have today. If this information had been used back then, it would have prevented the Crusades, the Inquisition, indulgences, all the mass submission, because in the end, what is religion? It's submission. People submit to believing in things in a completely blind way, and they don't even know why they're repeating the things they're repeating. So today, with the advancement of translation technologies, digitization, and artificial intelligence, these deep messages are circulating again. But it's not without resistance that these messages start circulating again. Even here on YouTube, I face a lot of resistance when I talk about these topics. And I'm not even talking about followers who don't like it and leave negative comments. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about resistance from the platform itself. Because the structure that is sustained by the fragility of ignorance, that structure still tries to erase these traces. So the documents disappear, the researchers are discredited. This artificial intelligence research will definitely be discredited because the dominant narrative is still imposed with a lot of force. But the existence of the Gospel of Judas, it's a crack in that narrative, right? It's a literal glitch in the matrix, a crack in the wall of reality. Guys, that wall is really thin, okay? It's thinner than we think it is. Because we live in a reality that's balanced on convenient edited versions of the truth. So we edit the truth the way we want, right? And we present that truth the way we want. People buy into those truths, right? Especially because they don't have another option, but those truths are forged. And for me, the biggest example of all this is that story about Jeffrey Epstein, which has been going on recently, right? Where pre-established things are being edited for the benefit of very powerful people. So like if you're seeing this happen now in 2025, and we have all this control on social media, where we know everything, where we have cameras, where we have information, where we have documents. Imagine how easy it was to edit reality in the past, when all you had to do was change a name. There you forge some heroes, you sculpt villains, almost with surgical precision, right? All the myths we have today, they were created with surgical precision to keep us inside a fence. And the Gospel of Judas, guys, it's a stumbling block for those people, right? Every stumbling block in your way, you can remove it, but you can't hide a stone, right, guys? And when someone finds that stone, right, they start to realize that the ground we're standing on isn't that solid after all. In other words, our certainties are based on created narratives, and in this case, in this narrative, the traitor could be the messenger. Judas, in this whole story, might have a much stronger role than we imagine. He can bring us this notion of what reality is like, a fragile construction made of pieces that were hastily put together there out of fear that someone would discover the final path of this labyrinth. Maybe deep down, guys, that's all that was left, looking at these forbidden texts like someone who deciphers a code, right? Because nowadays we're looking at this and we're deciphering a code. And accepting that knowledge has always been the greatest act of rebellion, because that's what we're doing today, okay? Here on this channel, I bring knowledge as a form and act of rebellion. And once we understand that reality, this reality we exist in is malleable. It's symbolic and editable, right? And it is editable by very strong powers that are constantly editing what you think, right? Do you like Labubu now? Why don't you like Furby anymore? Because now it's Labubu, so let's edit reality to make people like things they don't even know they're liking. I mentioned Labubu as an example, and there's already a live stream here about it. But there are hundreds of thousands of other examples of realities that are being edited. Our truth is really a compilation of edited realities. So when we discover that Judas didn't betray, but actually set free, maybe we are finally ready to set ourselves free as well. So was that the message he wanted to bring? Did artificial intelligence read this message the wrong way? Or have we been manipulated our whole lives because of something so silly? Anyway, guys, look, I'm going to show you an image of the playlist of the mysteries of the Forbidden Library of Nag Hammadi, okay? There are 4 videos in total, but I'm going to add this one there, so there will be 5 videos. And in this playlist, I talk about the forbidden teachings of Jesus, about the alien, about the 13 secret codes, about the true mission of Jesus. And for the cherry on top, I have an interview, right? With Jean Valélon, who is currently one of the biggest promoters of this Gnostic story, one of the biggest promoters on earth, of this forbidden story that was not told to us in the right way. Anyway, that's what I wanted to tell you all today, right? I wanted to bring up this topic of artificial intelligence here. I saw that you were really interested in that analysis the artificial intelligence did of the Bible, so I thought you might also be interested in this analysis here of the Gospel of Judas. I'll stop here. I'm going to say goodbye to you all. If you found this video because YouTube recommended it to you, know that this is a miracle. That doesn't happen again, okay? Lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. Take this chance and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss anything I post here. And if you like hidden and forbidden knowledge, come join the channel members because I'm always uncovering and bringing hidden knowledge to the members. And last but not least, subscribe to the Shorts channel if you haven't already. This is my new second channel. The link is in the description and should show on the end screens of this live. All right, everyone, I'll see you in our next live. Bye.